Hi everyone, I've just brought another video for you guys, so let's get started without further ado. Also, remember to like and comment. Tell me which manhwa you'd like me to cover next. Let's do this. XML. The young man walked through the busy city, trying to maintain his composure amidst the usual urban routine. However, his vision showed him something no one else saw. Mysterious numbers floated clearly above the heads of the people around him. These digits appeared above everyone, without exception. He watched the men drinking, confused, as he had no idea what that count meant. The visual anomaly made him tense and sweaty. His eyes shone, overwhelmed by that inexplicable information that relentlessly haunted him. No matter where he went, the count was there. Whether in casual conversations or professional meetings, everyone carried those numbers above them. Even on public transport, the vision persisted. The protagonist watched the passengers, surrounded by floating data that he didn't know how to interpret. In the streets, he witnessed scenes of submission. He saw a man humiliating himself before others. But stunned, he only watched the situation from a distance. Doubt began to erode his stability. Faced with those persistent hallucinations, he wondered if his mind was finally collapsing. He considered ignoring it all once and for all. However, he quickly realized that indifference would not be a viable option. Upon arriving home, reality hit him hard. The expression on his face instantly changed from tiredness to pure shock and dread. He came across a tense domestic confrontation. A man stood ready to leave, while a woman remained huddled on the floor. The atmosphere was heavy with painful lamentations. The woman cried copiously, blaming herself for being a useless mother and cursing her own fate. The man's response was ruthless and authoritarian. He issued a final threat, demanding that no one ever cross his path again. The young man stood paralyzed, processing the verbal violence he had just witnessed. Fear and disbelief took over his senses. With the aggressor out of sight, only pain remained. He knelt in the dim light of the kitchen, trying to support the woman who was breaking down in tears. The boy's past was marked by a constant and arduous struggle for survival. He agreed to carry heavy boxes and perform any manual labor that came along. The young man also worked on the streets under the hot sun, maintaining his determination despite the physical exhaustion. Even when his body begged for rest, he spent sleepless nights studying to change his life. All that sacrifice paid off when he finally earned his place in a respectable office. His intense dedication to work soon caught the attention of a close colleague. The boy's commitment seemed to be the talk of the moment in that corporate environment. The employee made a point of commenting to a supervisor about the remarkable effort of the new colleague. However, the protagonist's focus suddenly changed when something peculiar caught his eye. He carefully observed a burly man who was taking advantage of the time to eat at his desk. The young man approached with some documents in hand, interrupting the superior's moment of rest. The man reacted with hostility and immediate nervousness when confronted about certain pending issues. Before the protagonist's eyes, complex numerical sequences began to shine and reveal themselves. His attention then turned to a lively group, where a charismatic man stood out. That individual laughed confidently, unaware that the gigantic value above his head was being read. The protagonist tried to present his report, but was met with total disregard. The supervisor seemed much more interested in his meal than in any professional matter. The man continued to eat voraciously, ignoring the employee's presence. The lack of respect was as evident as the grease dripping from his snack. A dry sound cut through the air, but the supervisor didn't even flinch. The young man remained there, powerless, observing the blatant negligence of his hierarchical superior. The protagonist felt the tension rise, sweating coldly in the face of that absurd situation. He realized that he would not be able to resolve anything through dialogue at that moment. Later, in the solitude of his room, the young man sat on the bed, dejected. The frustration of the workday weighed on him, making him question his choices. He was immersed in dark thoughts, staring into the void. However, the memory of the injustice in the office ignited a spark of determination in his eyes. The boy picked up his cell phone and made a drastic decision. He dialed the number of the National Tax Service, ready to expose the irregularities he had noticed. The complaint had an immediate effect. Shortly thereafter, the corrupt supervisor was arrested by the authorities, accused of embezzling large sums of money from the company. As the man lowered his head, defeated, the protagonist's vision activated. A huge, bright number floated above the criminal, revealing the extent of his actions. Suddenly, the luminous figure cracked and shattered. It was as if the supervisor's downfall was being visually recorded by the young man's mysterious power. The corrupt man was led out of the building, escorted by the officers. His career and arrogance seemed to have come to a definitive end at that moment. However, as he was being taken away, the man looked back with a disturbing smile. Even in handcuffs, he wore a sneering expression, showing no remorse. Back in the office, the protagonist observed the ensuing chaos. The sudden arrest caught everyone by surprise, generating murmurs and shocked looks among colleagues. The young man remained still, processing what had just happened. The heavy atmosphere of the place seemed to have dissipated along with the departure of the dishonest boss. Walking down the street after work, he reflected on the consequences of his actions. The power to see those numbers was proving to be a dangerous and effective tool. The protagonist walked through the bustling city streets. To anyone else, it was just an ordinary crowd going about their daily routine. However, his vision revealed the hidden truth. The world was infested with cheaters, and the floating numbers exposed the corruption that each individual carried with them. The young man narrowed his eyes, focused. Through his lenses, the magnitude of the dishonesty around him became undeniable, reflecting directly in his eyes. An internal change began to occur. Passive perception gave way to a growing energy, signaling that he would no longer be just an observer. In his mind, indignation took physical form. He visualized his justice striking the corrupt, hitting the lies they upheld. The protagonist's fury extended to all the dishonest. Men and women who profited unduly felt, in his imagination, the impact of his judgment. This new power manifested as a weapon in his hands. He held the spiritual blade firmly, ready to cut evil at its root. With a decisive movement, the young man delivered a final blow against the representation of greed. Nothing could resist the strength of his new conviction. He smiled, feeling invincible. The protagonist promised himself that he would make all those crooks pay every penny they stole. Back in reality, his posture changed completely. Displaying a newfound confidence, he presented the document in his hands with a victorious smile. Later, the young man found himself alone, surrounded by papers. The silence of the moment allowed him to process the true extent of what he had just discovered. He visualized a shower of money falling around him. Although the origin of that gift was a mystery, he finally understood that his ability was the key to wealth. His eyes gleamed with an electric determination. Adjusting his glasses, the protagonist fully accepted the lucrative destiny that was now within his reach. Without wasting time, he decided to test his theory. With pen in hand, he began to carefully mark the numbers on a betting slip. The focus was absolute. As he filled out the form, the young man knew he was about to rewrite his financial future using the power that fate had given him. The exam day finally arrived. The protagonist attended the first round of written tests for the position of grade 7 civil servant in tax inspection. The young man focused intently on the questions. Behind his glasses, his eyes analyzed every detail, aware that this moment would define his professional future. He maintained his composure during the test. As he filled in the answers, the protagonist displayed a calculated calm, confident in his performance. Later, walking through the busy city streets, he checked his cell phone. An unexpected notification interrupted his thoughts and caught his attention. He stopped in the middle of the sidewalk to read the message carefully. The expression on his face changed instantly from curiosity to deep concern. It was an urgent warning from the hospital. The staff reported that they had been unable to contact him earlier, and that his mother, Myungja Lee, had been rushed to the emergency room. Panic took over him immediately. Ignoring the crowd around him, the young man took off in a frantic run, desperate to get to his mother's side. He arrived at the university hospital at dusk. However, the relief of arriving was quickly confronted by the reality of the total amount of the medical bill presented. At the discharge counter, the protagonist faced the receptionist. The silence was heavy as he processed the significant charge he had just received. He looked at the document in his hands, feeling the weight of frustration. The amount was high and represented a stressful financial obstacle at that delicate moment. Despite the financial problem, he found his mother in the lobby. She seemed recovered, and the young man prepared to take her home, relieved that she was well. Back at the building where they lived, he checked the mail. His hand groped inside the mailbox, removing the accumulated papers with some anxiety. Already outside, in the night corridor, he leaned against the railing, visibly shaken. The physical and mental exhaustion of the day seemed to have finally taken its toll. Suddenly, he took a misstep. His feet seemed to lose their grip on the floor, indicating a sudden loss of balance or an intense physical reaction. His heart pounded violently in his chest. An expression of pure shock and terror took over his face as he reacted to something overwhelming in the darkness. The young man collapsed to the floor, his breath escaping his lungs. The weight of recent events seemed to physically crush him against the cold pavement. The frustration soon turned into blind fury. He rose and prepared to throw his study book away, determined to give up all his effort at that moment. However, his arm was intercepted in the air before he could complete the gesture. The violent movement was abruptly interrupted, taking him by surprise. A firm hand held his wrist, preventing him from getting rid of the material that represented both his hopes and his failures. A well-dressed man appeared before him, questioning with curiosity why he would throw everything away after passing the written stage. The stranger seemed interested in hearing his story. XML, the stranger calmly took the book from the young man's hands, advising him not to get worked up. The tension of the moment was broken by the serene intervention of that individual. With a calm smile, the man held the study material as if it were precious. He exuded a confidence that brutally contrasted with the boy's despair. Instead of discarding the book, the stranger handed it back. The protagonist received the object, still stunned and confused by the sudden interaction. At that moment, the young man's attention was captured by a detail on the man's wrist. The watch shone intensely, suggesting an unattainable level of wealth and power. Instinctively, he activated his visual ability. His eyes focused intensely, seeking to see beyond the surface to understand who was really in front of him. The vision was almost blinding. A powerful aura emanated from that individual, confirming through his ability that this was no ordinary man. The man, however, simply maintained his cordial smile and inviting posture, completely oblivious or indifferent to the supernatural analysis he was receiving. The shock of that presence, added to his fragile emotional state, was too much to bear. The young man felt control slipping away, unable to contain the internal turmoil. He finally burst into a rant, shouting to the heavens about how he felt cursed and persecuted by bad luck. The man remained there, calmly asking what he considered so unfair. With his face bathed in tears, the protagonist looked up, exposing all his vulnerability and the pain of feeling that the world was inherently cruel to him. The young man remembered the days of optimism, when he naively believed that honest effort would be enough to succeed in life. Even during exhausting manual labor, he maintained the hope that his dedication would eventually be recognized and rewarded. The mysterious man just listened, absorbing every word of that bitter outburst without interrupting. Unable to contain the weight of reality, the student collapsed, covering his face as crying completely overwhelmed him. The well-dressed stranger watched the scene with analytical curiosity, touching his face as if coldly assessing the situation. The frustration accumulated over years exploded, turning into tears of pure powerlessness and uncontrollable anger. The protagonist shouted against the injustice of the world, yelling and questioning whether the law served any purpose other than to oppress the weak. However, the observer remained impassive. His fixed gaze showed no pity, only an unsettling and calculating calm. He firmly held the book that the young man had tried to discard, preventing that symbol of effort from being thrown away. The man seemed to ponder what he had just heard, calculating his next move with precision. A slight sign of decision appeared on his face. He had concluded how he should proceed in the face of that breakdown. With elegant and calm movements, the stranger reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket to retrieve something. The man's imposing posture dominated the environment, causing the student to stop, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. The crying ceased, giving way to bewilderment. The young man waited, tense and stunned, for what was to come next. The man's gaze became penetrating and serious, indicating that the moment of lamentation was over and something new would begin. The young man lowered his head, feeling the weight of shame after his emotional outburst. The silence of the night seemed to amplify his sense of powerlessness. Suddenly, something interrupted his dark thoughts. He looked up, alert, realizing that the interaction was not over yet. The well-dressed man had paused his movements. He held his wallet firmly, as if calculating exactly what he would do next. With a subtle change in posture, the stranger regained his elegant composure. He looked at the boy with an expression of someone who had made a decision. The protagonist was stunned, unable to process what he had just heard. Confusion was evident on his face as he tried to understand the situation. He stared at the man intensely, internally questioning whether that stranger really possessed the capacity for justice that he appeared to have. Ignoring the doubt in the air, the man pulled out a pen. He began to write quickly on a small pad he carried with him. The sound of paper being torn cut through the silence. With a decisive movement, he detached the sheet where he had just written. The stranger held out his hand, offering the piece of paper to the boy. The gesture was direct, demanding that the young man accept what was given to him. A playful smile appeared on the man's face as the protagonist took the note. He seemed to challenge the young man to question the reason for that offer. The boy held the paper with both hands, his eyes fixed on the content. Disbelief took over him as he realized what was written there. The man casually walked away, making it clear that he expected nothing in return. The young man remained standing, bent over in shock at the unexpected gift. Cold sweat ran down the protagonist's face as he reread the message. Anxiety and surprise mixed in his agitated mind. The benefactor observed the boy's exaggerated reaction with a slightly comical expression, feigning innocence about the impact of his gesture. The well-dressed man laughed, amused by the situation as he got into the vehicle. He seemed pleased with the impact he had on the young man. The young man remained still, stunned by the sudden turn of events. Confusion washed over him as he tried to process what had just happened. Before leaving, the stranger gave a serious look and imposed a clear condition. This would be the only time he offered his help. Without waiting for an answer or thanks, the man turned his back, ending the conversation right there. Once inside the car, he settled in and fastened his seatbelt, ready to leave the place and the young man behind. With a casual farewell gesture to his forehead, the man signaled goodbye, maintaining an air of mystery and confidence as the vehicle prepared to leave. The protagonist looked at the paper in his hand, which revealed a tax service contact. There was an implicit promise of a reunion, but only if he learned a specific lesson. The young man then dove into his studies with total dedication. He spent his mornings attending lectures, determined to absorb all the necessary knowledge. In addition to theory, he stayed attentive to everything around him in the workplace. On the phone, he absorbed every piece of information, focused on his new goal. His personal life also seemed to stabilize. He accompanied his mother, who was now smiling radiantly on the phone, recovered and happy as he brought her coffee. Time passed, and the moment of truth arrived. Wearing a formal suit, the young man muttered to himself, trying to control his nervousness before the test. He stood before the examining board in a bright room. The evaluators sitting against the light called his name to begin the inquiry. The crucial question was asked, echoing in the silent room. They wanted to know exactly what kind of public servant he aspired to become. With a firm and determined look, he declared his mission without hesitation. His goal was to be the agent who would bring relentless justice against tax evaders. This determination was born from a deep and recent pain. He recalled the despair he felt when facing a message on his cell phone, the breaking point that forged his new will. The protagonist kept the family photo nearby. That image of happier times served as a constant reminder of his origins and motivation to move forward. All his hard work in his studies had finally paid off. The young man was now reporting for his new position at a tax office in the heart of Seoul. Standing under the falling snow, he contemplated the building. That place would be the stage for his new battle, where he would put his skills to the test. However, the reality of the tax system was complex. A voice explained the nuances of the job, revealing how wealth flowed in unexpected ways. The narrative exposed an absurd scenario. School-aged children accumulated real estate fortunes, acting as large landowners in a rigged game. But the truth was darker. It wasn't the children, but their wealthy parents, who abused legal loopholes to hide dirty money. The young employee, however, saw through these maneuvers. With his keen perception, he analyzed the digital data, identifying exactly where the tax evasion was happening. While he delved into the complexity of the numbers, the environment around him was mundane. A long-haired colleague took the opportunity to sleep at his desk, oblivious to everything. The calm was abruptly interrupted. A supervisor clapped his hands loudly, announcing the end of the break and waking the office up for work. The older man settled into his chair with a heavy sigh, preparing to resume the bureaucratic routine of the afternoon. Suddenly, the protagonist rushed past him like a bolt of lightning. The rookie's quick and unexpected movements startled the supervisor, who almost jumped out of his chair. The man with glasses reacted with visible irritation. He clenched his fists, annoyed by the sudden agitation and the newcomer's lack of decorum. The young man, however, was focused on his mission. He held a file firmly, confident that he had found something crucial in his analysis. Without wasting time, he went to the supervisor's desk. The protagonist presented the completed work, awaiting the evaluation of his discovery. The supervisor, still irritated and skeptical, demanded that he hand over the document. He seemed to doubt that the rookie could have produced anything useful so quickly. The young man recoiled, surprised by the sudden hostility emanating from his superior. The supervisor flipped through the report violently, desperately searching for any flaws in the impeccable work. The rhythmic sound of the folder hitting the boss's hand increased the tension in the air. The protagonist waited, motionless. The older man twisted his face into an expression of pure disdain, refusing to accept the rookie's competence. Confused by the lack of response, the employee tried to question the superior's attitude. He let out a heavy sigh, feeling the weight of the toxic environment fall on his shoulders. The coworker watched the scene with obvious concern, realizing that the situation was about to get worse. She quickly made a gesture asking for silence, trying to prevent the young man from making an irreparable mistake. The woman whispered the cruel truth. The hierarchy there was based on friendships with the owners, not on merit. The protagonist was shocked by the revelation. Trying to protect him, she put her hand on his shoulder, silently begging him not to react. XML. However, a voice filled with arrogance cut through the moment of hesitation. The supervisor flashed a smug grin, clearly pleased to exert his abusive power over his subordinates. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the room, interrupting the taunting. The young man's patience seemed to have reached its limit. The sudden noise caused the other employees to immediately stop their tasks, startled by the confrontation. Silence fell over the office as everyone turned to witness the outcome of the tension. The atmosphere in the office shifted instantly. The other employees stopped what they were doing, watching the commotion with a mix of shock and concern at the sudden shouting. The protagonist ran a hand through his hair, trying to contain his growing frustration. His patience was wearing thin in the face of this ridiculous and humiliating situation. The commotion drew the attention of the entire floor. Murmurs began to spread through the cubicles as colleagues tried to understand who was responsible for the heated argument. The supervisor completely lost his composure. Shouting and pointing his finger, he tried to impose his authority through intimidation, regardless of the scandal he was causing. While his colleagues silently begged him to apologize, the young man remained impassive. The boss's threats of dismissal did not seem to have the desired effect. He made a decision. Ignoring the superior's continued shouting, the protagonist simply turned his back and began to walk away, refusing to continue participating in the charade. Away from prying eyes, he finally stopped to breathe. Leaning against the door, the anger he had contained until that moment began to show, mixed with the adrenaline of the confrontation. He took off his glasses, his gaze hardening. His days as a submissive employee were over. He knew he needed to act differently to deal with this injustice. Suddenly, something awakened within him. His eyes glowed with a supernatural energy, activating the unique ability he possessed and changing his perception of reality. Without wasting time, he put the phone to his ear. It was time to make an important contact, someone who could change the game in his favor. The young man waited for the connection with a serious expression. He knew that the following conversation would be decisive, and there was no room for hesitation. On the other end of the line, the response came with a warning tone. The contact agreed to offer assistance, but made it clear that this would be a unique and limited opportunity. The protagonist clenched his fist tightly upon hearing the condition. He understood the risks, but was determined to make that one chance worthwhile. He got straight to the point in the negotiation. There was no time for beating around the bush. He needed to know exactly what the scope of the resources available were to execute his plan. The young man then exposed the whole hidden truth. He detailed the real estate corruption scheme involving the CEO and his subordinates, using the privileged information he had discovered. Away from the hustle and bustle of the office, the emergency corridor offered the silence needed for the next step. The protagonist held the phone to his ear, awaiting confirmation that his plan had been set in motion. The response came loaded with aggression. The contact on the other end of the line guaranteed that he would crush those involved in the dirty scheme. A loud, confident laugh echoed through the device, sealing the agreement to hunt down the culprits. Meanwhile, oblivious to what was to come, the supervisor continued to intimidate the director with shouts and public threats. The older man, completely dominated, bowed in submission, accepting the verbal abuse without resisting. Back at his post, the young man sat down calmly. He watched the unfolding events with a calculating look. Suddenly, the director's expression changed from fear to surprise as he noticed who had just entered the room. The atmosphere immediately became heavy. Faced with the new presence, any attempt at denial or nervous laughter died in their throats. The newcomers advanced through the office, ignoring formalities and going straight to the target. The supervisor paled, feeling a cold sweat, while his colleague watched the scene with growing apprehension. Confusion spread among the employees. The protagonist, however, only watched sideways, aware that justice had arrived. With a nonchalant movement, the young man stretched in his chair, relaxing as chaos ensued behind him. Firm and decisive footsteps echoed on the floor, approaching for the final confrontation. The man adjusted his tie and forced a confident smile, trying to maintain his composure and arrogance in the face of the inevitable approach. The supervisor changed his posture instantly. He displayed a forced and subservient smile, trying to disguise his previous tension in the face of the new presence in the room. Meanwhile, the director and his colleague remained seated on the sofa, completely dejected. The pair seemed to have lost all hope, unable to react to the humiliating situation. However, the burly man's facade of confidence soon crumbled. Sweat began to run down his face as he tried to deny the accusations, stammering flimsy excuses. His defense, however, was useless. The men sitting down murmured the truth, revealing that the real state of affairs was much worse than the supervisor was trying to portray. Panic took over the aggressor. He wiped his forehead frantically with a handkerchief, confronted with the discrepancy between the promised quality and the reality of the equipment delivered. The tension was so thick that the colleague next to him couldn't take it. As he tried to drink some water to calm down, the shock of the revelation caused an immediate physical reaction. He violently spat out the liquid, caught off guard by the audacity of the lies that were being exposed at that crucial moment. A heavy silence hung over the office. The atmosphere, once dominated by intimidation, was now filled only with anticipation of the impending judgment. With nowhere to run, the supervisor grabbed his head in despair. He realized that his manipulations had come to an end and collapse was inevitable. He continued to sweat profusely, holding the handkerchief as if it were his only salvation. The arrogance from before had disappeared, leaving only pure fear of the consequences. The final blow came when he read the document in his hands. His expression turned blank as he saw the financial penalty imposed, realizing the extent of the personal loss he would suffer. Oblivious to the emotional collapse around him, the young protagonist remained focused. He continued his notes with a disturbing calm, ignoring the drama of others. The boy wasn't shaken even by the laments in the background. He just typed on his computer, meticulously following the plan he had drawn up. The power dynamic had completely reversed. While the supervisor sank into depression and shame on the other side of the table, the young man worked, dominating the environment in silence. The defeated man tried to compose himself once more, wiping his swollen face. He looked around, stunned, trying to process the speed of his downfall. The young protagonist kept his focus on the computer screen, ignoring the empty environment around him. He continued to type with precision, determined to finalize his pending tasks before the end of the day. With the task finally completed, the boy threw his body back and stretched. He felt his bones crack, relieved that there was no one else there to watch his movements. The digital clock on the wall indicated that the night was already well advanced. Business hours had ended long ago, marking the end of an exhausting day. He massaged his stiff neck, feeling the accumulated muscle tension after hours of uninterrupted work. The physical exhaustion began to take its toll now that the adrenaline had subsided. For a brief instant, the disturbing image of the supervisor's face and a glimpse of violence crossed his thoughts. It was a bloody reminder of what could have happened if control had been lost. The protagonist left the building, walking alone through the cold night as he reflected on his routine. A silent doubt lingered over him, whether the next day would bring the same monotonous repetition. Suddenly, the loud sound of a horn interrupted his reverie. The young man turned his head abruptly, surprised to have his solitude broken in that deserted parking lot. A luxury car was parked there, with the charismatic man waving excitedly through the open window. He caught the boy's attention, seeming to be waiting for exactly that moment. The driver offered a relaxed and confident wink. His friendly attitude contrasted completely with the oppressive corporate environment that the young man had just left behind. The boy stared at the scene, momentarily paralyzed by the unexpected approach. He adjusted his backpack strap, processing the presence of that acquaintance outside the usual context. Soon after, the two were already on the road. While the protagonist remained tense and sweating in the passenger seat, the well-dressed man seemed perfectly at ease. The driver kept a satisfied smile on his face as he drove the vehicle. He radiated a calm that suggested that everything was going exactly according to his plans. The young man, however, cast a sidelong glance full of distrust and curiosity. He seemed about to question the intentions behind that sudden ride and the other's jovial attitude. The destination turned out to be a traditional restaurant with imposing architecture, bathed in a welcoming light. The charismatic man suggested the place, indicating that it was time for a proper meal. The fresh, well-cut meat was presented, shining under the establishment's lighting. The sight of the food promised a luxurious reward to end that turbulent night. An impressive variety of traditional dishes covered the table, demonstrating the generosity of that unexpected invitation. The host smiled warmly, encouraging his guest to eat as much as he wanted and put aside his shyness. Upon tasting the meat, the protagonist was amazed by the exquisite flavor, surprised by the superior quality of the banquet. While the young man indulged in the pleasure of the meal, the charismatic man watched him patiently, analyzing his behavior. With calm and precise movements, the host poured himself a drink, setting the stage for the real conversation. The boy swallowed the food quickly, regaining his composure as he noticed the subtle change in the atmosphere. The man drank slowly, savoring the moment of silence before addressing the real reason for that meeting. The protagonist adjusted his glasses, suddenly attentive and curious about the comment he had just heard. A mischievous smile appeared on the older man's face, who seemed amused by the boy's ignorance. He held the small glass in his hands, creating a deliberate, dramatic pause in the narrative. The young man stared at his interlocutor seriously, feeling that the casual conversation had ended. The host spoke confidently, finally revealing who he really was and what his occupation was. He placed the glass on the table with a dry sound, punctuating the revelation of his identity. The man formally introduced himself as a section chief from the tax department, a figure of considerable authority. Shock paralyzed the protagonist. The specific mention of the tax office left him visibly shaken and nervous. The imposing corporate building rose against the sky, a fortress of glass and steel that exuded power and bureaucratic authority. Within those walls, the mysterious man maintained a serene expression. He seemed to be in his natural habitat, emanating unwavering confidence. The young man, however, was stunned to understand the true hierarchy there. He realized that he was not facing a mere employee, but someone who commanded an entire fiscal region. Noticing the guest's apprehension, the man formally introduced himself as Jaehyun Shin. He tried to dispel the tension, questioning why someone capable of taking down superiors would be nervous around a director. Shin indicated the lavish table with a casual gesture, inviting him to relax. However, the atmosphere in the room remained heavy, with the young man still hesitant in the face of such opulence. The protagonist could barely process the situation. Distrust was etched on his face, internally questioning whether it was all some kind of elaborate trap. A heavy silence hung between the two. The director's penetrating gaze seemed to dissect the young man's reactions, awaiting the right moment to advance. Jaehyun Shin maintained his composure, holding his cup with elegance. He knew that the initial shock was a necessary step for what was to come. The young man adjusted his glasses, trying to regain focus. His mind worked feverishly, seeking to understand the true intentions behind this unusual invitation. The soft sound of liquid being poured filled the room. The ritual of serving the drink served as a bridge to begin the real conversation. The young man watched the glass fill, feeling the weight of the moment. Each gesture seemed calculated, increasing his anxiety about the purpose of this meeting. While serving the guest, the director noticed the other's slight hesitation. That simple act of courtesy carried an implicit pressure of subordination and respect. Suddenly, Shin's expression became more serious. He decided to abandon the social niceties and go straight to the crucial point of the meeting. Sitting on opposite sides of the table, the dynamic changed. The banquet was forgotten. Now, attention was entirely focused on the words that would be spoken. With an enigmatic smile and drink in hand, the general director prepared to speak. He was about to reveal the real reason for his interest in the young man. The young man was stunned by the revelation. The identity of the man in front of him transformed the casual dinner into something much more complex and dangerous. While the table was full of delicacies, the atmosphere grew heavy. Jaehyun continued the meal calmly, contrasting with the young man's rigidity. The officer tried to ease the situation, stating that there was no reason for pressure. However, his presence exuded an authority that was difficult to ignore. The protagonist remained alert, observing every gesture. He knew that, in that conversation, any carelessness could be fatal. A sharp snap broke the silence. The separation of the chopsticks sounded like a warning that the real negotiation was about to begin. Jaehyun pointed casually in the young man's direction. The sudden gesture made the young man recoil, still processing the situation. A confident smile appeared on the older man's face. He seemed amused by his guest's excessive caution. The young man adjusted his glasses, trying to hide his nervousness. He needed to compose himself quickly so as not to show weakness in the face of that assessing gaze. Jaehyun watched him carefully. Behind the friendly facade, there was the cunning of someone accustomed to reading other people's intentions. The man spun the empty glass between his fingers with dexterity. It was a calculated movement, demonstrating that he controlled the pace of the meeting. He then positioned the container on the table. The silent gesture was an invitation, or perhaps an order, waiting to be fulfilled. The protagonist understood the cue immediately. His expression became serious as he realized the social protocol he should follow. Respectfully, he leaned over and held the bottle with both hands. The young man poured the drink, fulfilling the etiquette required by the hierarchy. The liquid filled the glass as the officer waited. That simple act of serving established a momentary connection between the two. With the glass full, the ritual was complete. Now, with the formalities attended to, the real dialogue could flow. Jaehyun Shin observed the young man's gesture with approval. The young man's respectful attitude seemed to have pleased the older man. The liquid flowed into the glass, filling the silence between the two. That ritual sealed a tacit understanding before the real conversation. Shin drank with pleasure, displaying a smile of someone who was in control of the situation. He seemed to appreciate the submission to the rules of etiquette. The protagonist maintained a serious and impenetrable expression. He waited patiently, without being carried away by the apparent cordiality. With calculated movements, the young man adjusted his position at the table. It was time to do his part in the social dance of that dinner. He leaned in respectfully, extending his hand to serve his host. Reciprocity was essential to maintain the balance of the negotiation. Behind the lenses, the young man's eyes gleamed with a new determination. He realized that this connection could be the key to his goals. The magnitude of the opportunity revealed itself in his mind. No matter the target, his mission to pursue tax evaders finally had a clear path. He visualized himself small in front of a tower of incalculable wealth. Money seemed to fall around him, symbolizing the vast system he intended to face. It was like walking on clouds, hovering above common reality. He felt he was about to enter a much higher level of the game. The routine, however, continued at the Byomson tax office. The imposing building represented the official authority it served. Inside the office, the atmosphere felt different that day. Colleagues seemed restless and exchanged apprehensive glances. Discreet whispers filled the workspace. The attention of the other employees seemed focused on something unusual happening there. The protagonist analyzed a report on his clipboard with complete seriousness. He ignored the surrounding buzz, focused only on his duty. His piercing gaze swept over the area above his glasses. There was a sharp intensity in him, ready to confront any irregularity. The young man's mind wandered to recent events, recalling the key figures who had crossed his path in that complex web of influences. Back in the reality of the office, he kept his focus on the computer screen, ignoring the palpable tension and the cold sweat emanating from a nearby colleague. His eyes remained fixed on the data through his glasses, but his thoughts were far away, analyzing the connections he had recently discovered. He recalled the first of the two important men he met, the head of the property tax section, a figure of authority in the Samsung office. The image of that experienced and calculating man remained vivid in his memory, someone whose position demanded respect and strategic caution. The protagonist continued his routine tasks, typing incessantly, trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy while processing that crucial information. The peace, however, was broken abruptly when an angry supervisor appeared behind him, yelling criticisms that echoed through the workspace. The young man stopped his work, turning around with an expression of contained surprise at that sudden and noisy outburst of hostility. The man leaned over the cubicle divider, the veins in his neck bulging, pouring his frustration and anger directly onto his subordinate. The power dynamic became physical. The supervisor loomed menacingly over the desk, trying to intimidate the young man with his aggressive and dominant posture. Suddenly, the tension was cut by the arrival of a contrasting figure. The department head appeared, displaying a disarming smile and a peculiar tie. While the supervisor continued to foam with rage, pointing an accusing finger, the newcomer maintained a relaxed and jovial posture, completely ignoring the heavy atmosphere. The supervisor's face contorted in disbelief and fury, sweating coldly, unable to comprehend the carefree attitude in the face of his attempt at discipline. With a friendly and vigorous pat on the angry man's back, the department head dissipated the hostility with an overly animated and casual greeting. The protagonist watched the scene, momentarily stunned by the bizarre interaction between his superiors, trying to process the sudden change in atmosphere. The older colleague approached with a friendly smile, trying to initiate a casual interaction. He gestured casually, seeking the young man's attention in the hallway. To the protagonist's surprise, the man offered a colorful lollipop. It was an unusual and childish gesture in that corporate environment, intended to break the ice. They both sat on the bench in the break area. While the man seemed completely at ease, the young man held the candy with some stiffness, unsure how to react to that kindness. The colleague unwrapped his own candy and put it in his mouth. He displayed an expression of quiet satisfaction and a shrewd look, observing the reaction of the young man beside him. The protagonist brought the lollipop to his mouth, still suspicious. He was trying to understand the reason behind that sudden approach from a superior. At that moment, a symbolic vision crossed his mind. The image of the candy suddenly connected to a child being led by the hand in a rain of money. The man stood up calmly, keeping the candy in his mouth. His relaxed posture contrasted with the usual seriousness of the office, but he seemed to have a goal. He then reached into his pants pocket. The sound of the fabric indicated that the casual interaction was about to change its tone to something more practical. The colleague extended a folded paper full of notes towards the young man. The protagonist accepted the document, surprised by the sudden change of subject. Upon opening the sheet, he came across a complex hand-drawn table. The paper contained columns of meticulously organized data and numbers. Isolated in the glass room, the dynamic between them changed. The man waited standing, watching closely as the young man analyzed the content he had been given. The protagonist focused entirely on analyzing the data. With his hand on his chin, he mentally checked each figure presented in those lines, looking for flaws. The man smiled confidently, casually asking if he had made any mistakes. His attitude suggested that he knew exactly the value of what he had delivered. The young man froze, sweating coldly at what he saw. His quick analysis confirmed that the calculations were absolutely correct, a precision that left him stunned. Faced with the young man's lack of response and vacant stare, the man's expression changed to concern. He tried to get the protagonist's attention, who seemed to have gone into shock. Suddenly, a brilliant idea popped into the protagonist's mind. The solution to the problem became crystal clear, bringing him a sudden understanding. While he analyzed the crumpled paper, the colleague next to him continued his speech. The man gestured, trying to impose his vision on the young man with an air of superiority. The employee bit the candy hard, breaking it. That dry sound marked the end of his passivity in the conversation, and the beginning of his counterattack. He interrupted the other's flow with a sharp technical question. The young man seriously questioned whether the man understood the dangerous concept of a donation with encumbrances. The colleague, however, kept his finger raised. He smiled with excessive confidence, unaware that the dynamic of the conversation had changed drastically. XML. The protagonist adjusted his glasses, focused and serious. It was time to explain the financial trap hidden behind that seemingly generous proposal. He mentally described how that gift carried a hidden weight. Accepting it would mean taking on a multi-billion-dollar debt impossible to carry alone. The supposed advantage would quickly turn into a nightmare. The recipient would end up suffocated and buried by the fiscal and legal obligations attached to the agreement. In practice, that meant taking on a colossal debt with the bank. The gift was just a maneuver to transfer financial responsibility to someone else. It would be a destructive act, comparable to dropping a failed building on someone unprepared. The transaction would bring no profit, only the total ruin of the recipient. The supervisor found the complex theory amusing. He laughed loudly and slapped the young man hard on the back, dismissing the technical warning as a big joke. The man continued smiling, chewing the candy with total disregard. Arrogance prevented him from seeing the seriousness and precision of the fiscal analysis he had just heard. Later, the protagonist went out into the open air, away from the tension of the office. Under the clear sky, he removed his glasses, feeling refreshed and confident in his deduction. The city around him seemed different now. The buildings weren't just concrete, but complex stacks of numbers and obligations that he could decipher. In front of the tax administration building, he reaffirmed his purpose. That bureaucratic environment was the battlefield where he would exercise his true talent. The senior colleague spotted his target and smiled, preparing to call the newcomer's attention. He waved vigorously at Shin, indicating the meeting place. The protagonist, maintaining his professional posture, walked in the direction of the call. The young man advanced with firm steps in the daylight. There was an aura of determination and focus on his face as he headed to work. Already inside the vehicle, Shin confirmed that he had understood the mission briefing. The driver seemed satisfied with his partner's quick thinking. The car followed its route through the organized streets of the city, taking the pair towards their corporate objective. In the protagonist's mind, the situation unfolded in visual metaphors. He imagined the crushing weight of financial obligations that threatened to crush the average citizen. While the senior maintained a lighthearted demeanor, Shin visualized the imminent danger. To him, it was a fiscal time bomb about to detonate. The driver continued to drive the vehicle with a smile on his face, demonstrating total confidence in the task they were about to perform. Shin, in turn, remained in reflective silence. He absorbed the information, mentally preparing himself for what was to come. The vehicle finally parked in the designated spot. The journey was over, and it was time to act. Before them stood the imposing headquarters of the target company. The older colleague observed the facade of the building, confirming that they had arrived at the correct destination. The young man reviewed the documentation in his hands with a sly smile. The senior watched, approving of his subordinate's meticulous preparation. Shin's eyes scanned the lines and columns of data. Those complex numbers told a story that only he knew how to interpret so clearly. The senior partner raised a brown envelope expectantly. He seemed eager to start the procedures and questioned whether everything was ready. Together, they entered the room with an overwhelming energy. The pair invaded the space with authority, ready to confront the situation. The reaction to the inspector's words was visceral. The senior executive couldn't maintain his composure and spat out his drink in pure shock. Immediately, the bespectacled subordinate jumped off the sofa. He pointed his finger at the young inspector, indignant at the audacity and supposed lack of respect for hierarchy. The protagonist, however, remained unperturbed. With a casual gesture, he brushed off his suit jacket, as if brushing away insignificant dust. That indifference only inflamed the company's employees even more. They gritted their teeth and clenched their fists, furious with the visitor's attitude. The older executive, however, recovered quickly. He picked up his glass again, displaying a cold and calculating smile as he assessed his opponent. The young inspector was not intimidated. He leaned forward, invading the man's personal space with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. The old man narrowed his eyes. He tried to probe the boy's intentions, looking for any sign of hesitation or weakness, but he found only absolute determination. The protagonist's eyes remained focused, without wavering for even a second. The moment of truth had arrived. The inspector smoothly slid an official document across the table, revealing the emblem of the tax authority. The executive leaned back and crossed his arms, maintaining his haughty posture. He seemed to believe that this was nothing more than a bluff or a waste of time. With a calm smile, the protagonist began to explain the facts, gesturing calmly as he dismantled the opponent's defense. The older man's patience ran out. In a brusque movement, he snatched the report from the inspector's hands to check the contents personally. The reading confirmed his worst fears. While the executive's face contorted in anger, the young man maintained an expression of victorious satisfaction. The hidden truth manifested visually for the protagonist. Above the desperate man's head, a gigantic numerical value shone, exposing the real debt. The inspector finalized his argument, detailing the tax infraction with surgical precision. He dominated the environment, leaving the executive with no escape route. Samel. The businessman wore an arrogant smile, completely oblivious to the menacing presence of the monstrous entity looming over him. The protagonist, however, watched that confidence with serenity, knowing he had the necessary advantage to take him down. He began to detail the financial irregularities, describing exactly how the money was being moved through the accounts. Coolly, the young man pointed out that loan payments were coming out of the account, contradicting the official records. He questioned the logic behind the declared profits, mocking the obvious and clumsy attempt to manipulate the annual numbers. The senior executive laughed dismissively, trying to downplay the seriousness of the accusation and act as if it were all a joke. Tired of the charade, the protagonist slammed his hand on the table forcefully, demanding that the situation be taken seriously. The old man's smile vanished instantly, replaced by an expression of shock, while his assistant beside him trembled nervously. The young man took a sip of his drink with complete tranquility, enjoying the moment of silence to let the tension build. Upon examining the document more closely, the businessman realized with horror that his most secret transactions had been discovered. The investigation even revealed hidden personal expenses, tracking exorbitant spending intended for his daughter. The protagonist confronted the man about diverting money to his family, exposing the hypocrisy of claiming billions in debt. He stated that he had done his homework and demanded an immediate explanation, cornering the executive with the stark truth. In absolute panic, the man screamed and grabbed the papers, desperate in the face of the undeniable exposure of his crimes. Observing the chaotic scene, the other man present smiled slyly, clearly pleased with the executive's despair. The young man maintained the pressure, holding the incriminating report firmly. He coldly asked if the superior wanted him to continue exposing the crimes right there. A sense of triumph swept through the protagonist. The system confirmed his absolute victory, demanding immediate payment of the outstanding moral and financial debt. The executive's phone rang, interrupting the heavy silence in the room. He tried to maintain a facade of authority, but the cold sweat betrayed his growing nervousness. With an arrogant smile, the man answered, believing his connections would save him. He mocked the young man, warning that he had made a fatal mistake in challenging him. The boss laughed loudly during the call, an exaggerated performance to demonstrate power. He acted as if the situation was totally under his control in front of his subordinates. He continued the charade, casting disdainful glances at the others. His confidence contrasted with the panic plastered on the face of the bespectacled employee beside him. The protagonist and his colleague watched the scene cautiously. The boss's sudden change of mood seemed suspicious and disconcerting to those watching. The older man maintained his smug smile on the phone. He was certain that this call would change the game in his favor and destroy his opponents. However, his expression crumbled in an instant. The executive's heart raced when the voice on the other end of the line said something he never expected to hear. Confusion immediately filled the room. The two observers realized from the boss's stunned reaction that his supposed trump card had failed miserably. The young man, however, remained calm and focused. He knew exactly why the executive's escape plan was collapsing at that precise moment. A message on his cell phone revealed the true trap that had been set. The prosecutor's office was already on its way, having been previously alerted to the fiscal irregularities that were about to be exposed. The protagonist smiled with satisfaction as he watched the plan come to fruition. Having powerful allies and the right evidence on his side ensured the perfect checkmate. the executive's reality shattered completely. The weight of defeat fell upon his mind, crushing his sanity and any hope of escape. Absolute panic took over his face. With no connections to save him and the law knocking at the door, all that remained was pure horror and despair. The shadowy entity issued a veiled threat, mentioning the man's daughter and the expectation of a payment. The warning hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. The executive froze, feeling the overwhelming pressure emanating from that presence. He realized he had nowhere to run. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he held the envelope that had been handed to him. Physical fear took over his body, undermining his authority. In an impulsive gesture, he grabbed the object tightly. The anxiety to discover the contents fought against the dread of what he would find. The comprehension of what was happening twisted his face into an expression of horror. Absolute panic replaced any trace of his former arrogance. Refusing to accept defeat, the supervisor tore up the documents in a fit of rage, while his subordinates watched in shock and the protagonist remained impassive. The young man, however, remained focused. His gaze shone with a supernatural intensity, signaling that the destruction of the papers was useless. As the pieces of paper flew, the final sentence was delivered. The man discovered that his company would be the target of a devastating tax investigation. The protagonist pointed his finger, sealing the opponent's fate. He coldly suggested that the executive prepare his explanations for the public prosecutor's office. The man's vision was invaded by an overwhelming energy. Reality seemed to bend under the weight of that punitive force. Mel. He felt like the ground vanished beneath his feet. Screaming in despair, the executive plummeted into a metaphorical abyss of financial ruin. Justice, however, operated in the real world. The imposing tax administration building became the stage where his fate would be sealed bureaucratically. All that remained of his career was reduced to a cardboard box. His belongings were collected in silence, marking the end of his tenure. Dignity was left behind. He protested and shouted, sweating profusely as he was taken into custody by law enforcement officers. Under the astonished gaze of the entire office, he was escorted out. The empire he believed he controlled had completely crumbled before everyone. The young man maintained his composure in the office, contrasting with the exhausted colleague just behind. The atmosphere in the workplace seemed to carry a silent, routine tension. Before him, an older gentleman displayed a welcoming smile. The friendly expression, however, seemed to hide years of corporate cunning and experience. Unexpectedly, the man offered him a ginseng candy. The casual gesture momentarily broke the rigid formality of that meeting. The protagonist hesitated, staring at the gift with suspicion. He didn't know if it was genuine kindness or some kind of eccentric loyalty test. Suddenly, another employee swiveled in his chair to join the conversation. His attitude was vibrant and relaxed, completely clashing with the seriousness of the moment. The young man ended up accepting the candy, holding it reluctantly by his side. He remained silent, trying to understand the strange dynamic between those people. The lively man gave a thumbs up, delegating responsibilities with contagious enthusiasm. He seemed to fully trust that the newcomer could handle the job with the manager. Awkwardly, the protagonist scratched the back of his neck, feeling out of place. That sudden excess of confidence placed in him generated more discomfort than pride. The gray-haired gentleman watched the scene with serene approval. There was a calmness in his posture that suggested he was in absolute control of the situation. Suddenly, the young man's heart raced in alarm. His intuition captured the true nature of that man, perceiving an imposing and dangerous presence hidden beneath the gentle facade. The two superiors stared at him with clear expectations, as if he were a valuable piece. The young man realized that he had entered into something much bigger than he imagined. Instinctively, he squeezed the candy wrapper with excessive force. The anxiety manifested physically as he processed the weight of that unwanted attention. The guy was surprised by a firm touch on his shoulder and direct words about his uniqueness. Someone there had noticed that he was not an ordinary person. The outgoing colleague stared at him closely, reinforcing the compliment with a knowing smile. He seemed to see through the protagonist's facade, recognizing his hidden value. However, the tone of the conversation changed drastically to a dark warning. The man's smile didn't falter as he warned that the near future would be chaotic and unpredictable. The senior colleague smiled confidently, anticipating the confusion that was to come. He decided that this was the ideal moment to intervene and demonstrate his abilities. A heavy aura surrounded the man as he bowed in respect. The environment became oppressive, suggesting that the submission present there carried a dark weight. He readily agreed with his superior, keeping his head down. There was no room for questions, only absolute obedience to the orders received. The protagonist activated his special vision, searching for the revealing numbers on the man with glasses. To his surprise, the analysis indicated that the target was clean, with no visible signs of corruption. The young man recoiled slightly, confused by the result. The absence of the usual indicators contradicted his suspicions and caught him off guard. The superior, however, did not hesitate. He turned his back and made a brief gesture, ordering them to accompany him immediately to the next step. The confrontation was direct and aggressive. The leader slammed his hand on the seated employee's desk, launching a serious accusation of tax evasion that shocked the room. Panic took over the accused instantly. His heart raced violently and cold sweat began to pour down at that abrupt revelation. He stared at the accuser, paralyzed by fear and the pressure of the moment. The despair in his eyes made it clear that he felt cornered. The colleague at the next desk cringed, visibly uncomfortable. The sudden tension in the office made her anxious, unsure how to react to that intimidating scene. The protagonist watched everything in silence, with an analytical gaze. He studied everyone's reactions, trying to understand the discrepancy between what he saw and the accusation made.